Welcome to episode 88 of the Necronama.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now, and in honor of Donald Trump's last week in office, I thought, hey, I should subject myself to 3 hours of white supremacist bullshit propaganda.
And I, excuse me, I got something in my throat. Hello there. I am Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of this podcast, and in the words of Nipsey Hussle and YG, fuck Donald Trump, and fuck the Klan, fuck neo-Nazis, fuck the Proud Boys, fuck 3%ers, fuck the Oath Keepers, fuck any of the pieces of shit that decided to raid the Capitol because you know what? You are all just a bunch of insecure motherfuckers. And speaking of insecurity, we're talking about Birth of a Nation, which is all about American insecurity. And for lack of a better term, fear of penises. I know we vowed to not talk about penises on the show for a while, but after all the reading I've been doing this past week and some of the research I've been doing, a lot of this shit involving racism comes down to genitalia.
That's really weird. You know why I find it weird? Because if you go back and listen to our Splice episode, people can't wait for alien genitalia, but they have a problem with black genitalia.
Well,
That's
not
crazy.
necessarily black genitalia, black and white genitalia mixing together.
Oh yeah, good point.
And it's a very weird complex that people have decided to, I guess, adhere to since 1644. And I say that because there was a court case that basically mandated race and then determined that people of different races, which race wasn't even a thing prior to this, because you went by your nation or your country of origin, nobody really gave a fuck about, your naughty bits mixing together. But once we come to America, and since there's a shortage of women, apparently, we got to limit what penises come into contact with those vaginas.
Well, then maybe don't go to other countries to get more penises to bring back. Just a thought. So
boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. I've been waiting our entire show to say that. I probably said it before, but
so I want to start with the fact that this was my choice. I'm the one that picked this film.
Well,
and
I've been prodding you for a while. For this one. It's just you made the choice this time.
Every time we do a panel, you bring up that this is a horror film. Mm-hmm. And I thought with everything that's been happening in America and where we are and the amount of propaganda, bullshit, and the amount of white guys losing their fucking minds and attacking shit, and the way that people tell stories from a different point of view, shall we say, I thought this is the film. And I had never seen it. And I watched it, and holy shit, is this relevant right this fucking second.
Yep.
So I just want to compliment myself on great choices. No, if you haven't seen this film, listen to our podcast and don't watch the film. Would you agree with that, Don?
I would say I have no problem spoiling this movie because I don't want people to watch it. I sign it for my classes, for my film as history courses that I teach. And my students, they all know, at least from, when I'm teaching in person, I tell them, just look up summaries, just look up, video clips, because one, this is a 3-hour silent movie. So right now, I mean, in the world of 2021, that's already going to be a deterrent. I mean, there are some great silent movies like Modern Times or The Dictator. I mean, anything Charlie Chaplin worked. But there are other good silent films. This movie, on the other hand, is straight up and down 3 hours of white supremacist propaganda. It's the U.S.'s version of Triumph of the Will. So, the Nazis had Triumph of the Will. Klansmen have Birth of a Nation. And the thing about this film is only watch what you feel like you can stomach. And in all honesty, more than 5 minutes, you're going to want to throw up anyway. It's just utterly disgusting that people believed this and that there are segments of the population that still believe it. Because the genesis of this film is from a book and play called The Klansman. But the ideology itself comes from this thing known as the lost cause, which those of you who don't know, this is why people to this day are still saying, oh, the Civil War was about states' rights, or it was about economic issues, or it was about taxes, and whatever stupid bullshit that somebody decided that they were going to say it was about. It was about slavery. Whether you're talking about the South seceding, I mean, you have to go no further than the cornerstone speech of Alexander Stephens, where he says it's about slavery and white supremacy. We want to keep our slaves, and we want to have a place where the white man is on top. And even when it came down to the North, initially it wasn't about slavery for them. It was the issue that these states were seceding out of fear that they were going to lose their slaves. And you know what? You can't leave just because you feel that we're going to pass some legislation, get rid of slavery. You know, the cause for Lincoln changes roughly 3 years into the war, or 3 years into the conflict. And he basically says, no, fuck you guys. You left. You know what? Anybody who's still there, who's a slave, you're now free. Fuck you guys. I'm freeing all your slaves. And if my men get down there and see some slaves, we're taking them. They're going to be contraband. They're going to be freed. Fuck you. And if you're racist, I will send the North to fight you. But this movie, and that's a long way to answer like whether or not somebody should watch this movie. But historically speaking, it gives you an idea of the mindset of not just people like D.W. Griffith, who is the filmmaker, but the shit that people were consuming to the point where they feel that the South was somehow noble in what they did. You know, it's like, oh, the federal government was overreaching and they decided to come down here and we fought back and we tried to stop their overreach. But, you know, we lost and we're just now dealing with it. If you have the opportunity, if you happen to live in, I'm going to speak from a Southern perspective, but if you happen to live in a Southern state, and Southern states are not definitely don't have the monopoly on this, but you're going to see a lot more of these monuments. The Southern states have a lot of Confederate monuments, which last time I checked, when you lose a war, you don't get monuments. But they have monuments throughout the South, and pretty much every town, like every county courthouse, seems to have one of these fucking stupid statues. Just ridiculous statues that have things on it like, oh, this is dedicated to the patriotic heroes of the Confederacy who fought in a noble cause and whatever the stupid, because I've read some of them and they all say ridiculous stuff like that. Oh, this was a noble cause in which they protected their homes, and they did. That narrative didn't become a thing until about the 1880s, 1890s, because there were people that were starting to, I guess, reframe what the war was about, but then also reframe what Reconstruction was, which is the period after the Civil War from 1865 until roughly 1876. You know, in reality, it goes until 1877, but it's done in 1876. And so when this one historian, and I'm putting quotations in that, by the name of Dunning, comes around and he starts saying all these things about, oh, the reason why Reconstruction didn't work is because black people didn't know how to govern themselves, and because there were corrupt white people who went from the North to the South who wanted to take advantage of Southerners, and completely leaves out the fact that the Klan is engaging in terrorism, the fact that Reconstruction never gets the support that it needs to work, because there is no Republican majority until like a couple of years after, you know, Reconstruction gets going, where they can really do anything. And then just within a few years after that, Democratic, especially Southerners, Democrats from the South get their seats back and don't push for anything. There's really no push for any type of progress during that period. I'm giving you like a short version, which really could be something that goes on for probably 4 or 5 hours. So those of you who are listening, some readings I would recommend, and this is going to be one of these episodes where I recommend some readings. I'm sorry. Heather Cox Richardson's The Death of Reconstruction, W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, Eric Fauner's, oh gosh, I'm going to get the titles wrong, but he has 2 books on Reconstruction itself. Let's see, Terror in the Heart of Freedom. You've got a lot of things that are out there. If I think of any other ones for that period, I will definitely post them when we post about the show.
Can you just post all of them anyway?
I will post all of them because it's important to understand that for most of us who went to public school, and this is nothing against public school, this has to deal with the lost cause narrative. Because groups like the Sons of Confederacy, or Sons of Confederate Veterans, and the United Daughters of Confederate Veterans, or whatever the hell they want to call themselves, they're the ones who started building all these statues. They're the ones that started carrying this story about what the South was, and it was great, and whatever. But they're also the ones, specifically the United Daughters of the Confederacy, that started spending the money to make textbooks for schools that completely whitewash history. I mean, just ridiculously, to where they said things like, oh, these guys who came down from the North are carpetbaggers, and they were con men, and they were thieves. I mean, there's a lot of anti-Semitic stuff that's thrown into it as well. A lot of racist jargon that they throw in, where they just kind of play around with the truth. And it was allowed to pass because there were no national standards with school curriculum and what's being taught. So in the South, you could go ahead and say that, everything that happened in Reconstruction that was bad was because Black people and white people from the North were trying to screw over the South. And everything that's good is because of white people, which is is because of white Southerners, white Christian Southerners, which is what you see in Birth of a Nation. Because they fully try to play around with this indictment of letting uneducated Negroes control state legislatures, where their main goal is we need to pass a miscegenation law where we can have sex with white women. And just watching the film, and you and I talked about before we started the show, that's funny on so many levels in the 21st century, or even the late 20th century, because that's what the fuck you're scared of. Is you're gonna ramp this up to turn it into, well, these freedmen weren't concerned with schools. They weren't concerned with jobs. They weren't concerned with health care, weren't concerned with having their marriages legally recognized and having their families protected or stable housing or anything like that. Their main concern was having sex with white women. And again, it's one of those things that you can laugh at now. But in 1915, this was part of that real white racial paranoia that led to a lot of the violence, which was, I can't let this person have too much power because that's what it might come to. I can't let this person have too much money or too much economic independence, because if he has 5 cents more than me, he's better than me now. It just became this weird thing. And James Baldwin even has this great quote that I'm going to butcher. But, he basically says, I'm not a nigger. You need me to be one so you can feel good about yourself. And he just breaks down. And if you want to look for the video, it's from when he was on the Dick Cavett show. And he was explaining it as well as when he was in England doing some debates. And he's just talking about that position as far as what we talked about before on this show. The white gaze, the male gaze, the female gaze, the black gaze. The way that someone looks at you, and he argued, you need me to be something that you can be afraid of, so then you can justify the way that you treat me. And he says that if you don't have me here to do that, who the fuck are you now? Like, your identity goes away as soon as you don't have me to point at, don't have me to ridicule, don't have me to basically say that I'm less than you are. And it's a great way to, I would argue, to start off this episode and talking about Birth of a Nation. And the first thing I'm going to say to you, James, or I guess ask, And it's kind of the flip from when we talked about Us and Get Out, and that is James. As a white guy,
I'm a guy who happens to be
guy who happens to be white. Let me explain that one before somebody. Like, what the fuck does that mean? Before the episode, I was telling James about, or before we started recording, I was telling James about this video that somebody made. It might have been on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And the gentleman was talking about, I'm going to explain some things to you, and I want to make it clear. There's white people, and there are people who happen to be white. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, all right, where's this going? And I immediately thought about the Chris Rock sketch of, there's black people, and then there's, and he says there's white people are the ones that went to the fucking Capitol and tore up shit. People who happen to be white are the ones who understand that racism is wrong. They understand things like white privilege and don't, piss and moan about the verbiage. They're people that understand what Black Lives Matter means, and they don't say stuff like, well, these people went to the Capitol. What about all these cities that BLM burned down? And they understand that shit isn't true. And he goes on and explains this whole thing as far as like, when someone says white people, they're talking about the ones that don't want to progress, don't want to grow, don't want to learn, don't see a problem with Gone with the Wind or Song of the South, or even a movie like this. They see it as, well, this was a great cinematic film, which I will concede. It was very groundbreaking for the time. And for the longest period, it was on AFI's top 100. It is thankfully no longer there. But yes, James, as a man who happens to be white.
Yes.
What did you feel, or what did you think when you watched this movie?
Holy shit, man. How can I even put this into words?
Well, you're going to have to, because it's a podcast.
Oh, shit, it is? All right, so I feel like my biggest takeaway from this was, holy shit, humans still haven't learned anything. And what I mean by that is it is so seeped in conspiracy theory bullshit. It's just covered in revisionist history that doesn't even begin to make sense. Like, don't even get me started on My Best Friend Lincoln or whatever the fuck that was. And it just amazed me how people can be so scared of one another. And I'm going more broad on this because this is what I took from it. We can be so scared of people that we don't know anything about that we make up this boogeyman and then we associate it with those people. And I'm fascinated by how this movie came out 106 years ago. And I feel like it came out this week. Like, it's just white people being fucking terrified of this fucking boogeyman. But the bigger problem I have with it is that all of their conspiracy shit is undone by the way they present the film. They destroy their own argument. And that's hilarious to me and so terrible at the same time, because I know what an impact this had. And I know how many, well, I don't know exact numbers, but I know how influential it was to the mindset in America. And I look at it and I see, like, they try to make black men such a boogeyman, but then, like, anytime there's a black man getting close to a white actress while they're filming, instead have a white guy in blackface, because they had terrified themselves to the point that they couldn't even film it. Like, you literally have your supposed monster right there. Hit us with it. Try to put that fear in me. Make me look at this white actress freaking out that a black man's so close to her. Like, if you're going to do this, like, do it. And I feel like they just kept shitting on their own argument in ways like that. And I'm going to let you speak in just a second, but even the intertiles, everything is so seeped in, we know we're wrong. You have to start it with, we're not trying to say that any race is bad. Next tile, black people coming to America fucked everything. Right. Right. Like, but it's the caveat that they have there. The fact that they feel they have to explain, we're not saying anything bad, tells me you're wrong.
Right.
So this film shits on its own fucking premise from the beginning. Like literally the first frame shits on the premise of the film. And what I take from that is what I see in America every single day, because these fucks who stormed the Capitol, or these people doing the whole BLM is the same thing, they're missing the point the exact same way, and they're missing that their presentation of their is destroying itself the exact same way. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, a couple of things. I was going to say, it's just like when somebody does that. I don't mean to sound racist, and then they go and say something racist. And even when this film came out, because we have this weird delusion and I'll speak for American society, but we have this weird delusion that, oh man, people are too sensitive today. I don't see, oh my God, these people are protesting that movie. What's next? What are people going to complain about next? Oh, they're too sensitive, and everybody's offended. You need your safe space, your snowflakes, and I just look at him like, you have no understanding of history. Because with this film, there were massive protests against it. I mean, it was a very popular film because it was a long feature film. It was roughly 3 hours. You had very limited entertainment at this point. A lot of the entertainment you have to be there to see. There's no television. There's no internet. A lot of these films are social events. So it's something to do. So when people go and see it, it's holy shit. There's this 3-hour movie. It's talking about the evils of Reconstruction and the Civil War and all this other stuff. So you get a lot of publicity from interest. But then you also get a lot of publicity from protest, which is, holy shit, these people don't want me to see this film. Oh my God, the NAACP and the Urban League, these black people don't want me to see this movie. I got to see what's going on with this movie. There were black people who wanted to see this movie because they're like, what the fuck is going on with this? Because this is, if the NAACP is telling me this is so bad, I need to see why. And it's just like any shocking type of entertainment. Because, for some reason, I'm thinking of Howard Stern. But with Howard Stern, people tuned into his show when he was on regular radio because they wanted to hear what he had to say. They were like, well, this guy's always saying some crazy outlandish stuff. I want to hear what he has to say. People who didn't like him listened to the show because they wanted to hear what crazy stuff he was going to say. And that's kind of what you have with this film. The Urban League and the NAACP, two African-American civil rights organizations, they had protests, they had marches, they had boycotts of theaters. I think in Kansas, this movie was banned from being shown because the fear was there are going to be enough black people who show up that might disrupt the movie. The producers of the film, or the film company itself, D.W. Griffith had advice sheets sent out to movie theaters. And I don't know if you ever worked at a movie theater or anybody who's listening, but every now and then you get an advice sheet from the production companies of those films. And I remember specifically when the Star Wars prequels came out, they were very straightforward. Like Lucas wanted somebody at the door for every showing to make sure that people weren't, sneaking into the movie. And then there was supposed to be another person inside the auditorium to make the entire time to make sure that no one was pirating the movie. So you had to dedicate staff, one person inside, one person outside the auditorium to make sure that nobody is, again, sneaking into the movie, but then also nobody's pirating the movie. Then it was, it has to be, THX sound has to be tuned to whatever level. And this has to be done. Oh, it has to be in this type of theater. So like all these things were going on. The advice sheet that you had for Birth of the Nation is pretty funny because it basically lays out, when it's going to be played, laying out who is going to be there to play the music, all these different things, like, what types of instruments to have playing in the theater. Because again, it's a silent film. You're going to have the orchestra or a band playing to go along with the film. And then with the advice sheet, there were very simple things like, make sure the projectors are oiled and maintained. They're clean, have everything from the advertisements and and all the slides and whatever ready when the show's going to start. Have a piano tuned to international pitch with 3 music stands and lights attached for the musicians, a shaded lamp on top of the piano. Very straightforward. But the one that is in all caps, please bear in mind that Negroes must not be admitted to Birth of a Nation under any circumstance. And
wow,
that, again, it's in all caps, which this is way before we started texting people to let them know we were angry. When you put all caps in something like this, it was to let you know, you better see this. This is important. Pay attention. And then it's just other stuff about make sure, anything that's left over, if there are copies or there's this or this, make sure you dispose of it, send it back to us, whatever, right? So when this went out, especially because the NAACP was boycotting this, the Urban League was boycotting movie theaters that were showing this, there was a lot of interest by white audiences. One, because the movies it's a thing to do. You're going to go out and get entertained. And then there's also the endorsement from the president. So Woodrow Wilson has a screening of this movie in the White House.
And he apparently he wrote half of it. I'm judging from the intertots.
Well, apparently. But he had this damning viewpoint or perspective on the film. And when he's asked about it after he screens the film, he tells the press, the White House press or whoever asked him, he's like, "Oh, I liked it." I said, it's like history written with lightning. The only thing about it that I regret is that the story is so true. And again, looking at this from enough distance and realizing that Woodrow Wilson fell into that Dunning school as well, as far as believing in the lost cause, his endorsement validates the movie. And this is way back when, not everybody is always going to like the president, but the presidency is a respected position. And at this time, because of the news outlets, because of the type of information that's available, things like that, if the president is behind something, a good amount of the public is going to be behind it as well. You're always going to have some resistance. You definitely had different competing political ideologies during that time period, but the endorsement of a president is enough. And it also lends itself to understanding the power that movies have. And what I will tell you and what I've told my students and other people is movies are a great way to learn things, but they're also a great way to mislearn things and misinterpret things. Even good films. Even, somewhat historically accurate films can focus on the wrong things. Or, and I know we're probably going to get some hate for this one, or certain musicals based off of certain founding fathers take vast liberties with history and change some things around. And then people who watch that take what is information in a play or a musical and think that is what actually happened. But again, because you're being able to reach such a large audience with a film like this, people are willing to accept it as fact because, we've all had those conversations with people of, hey, it has to be true. It was in the paper. It has to be true. It was written down. It has to be true because of X.
Yeah,
and then you realize that's not true.
Yeah, it's like when I watched Straight Outta Compton and I saw what a good guy Dr. Dre always was.
Yeah, he never hit a woman ever. Ever.
I couldn't resist.
No, that was one of the biggest complaints about the film. And I had a student who was big on hip hop. Like half my age, and I'm like, what do you know about old school hip hop? And he saw the film. He's like, what happened to that part with D Barnes? And everybody in the class looked at him like, what the fuck are you? It's like D Barnes. That was the entertainer that Dr. Dre beat up in the studio that one time. And they're all like, Dr. Dre beat up a woman? I'm like, and I basically say like, you guys have never heard that Eminem song where he makes fun of Dr. Dre for hitting a woman? You guys missed that part of Eminem's song? Okay. But no, that's again, it's the great thing about this. And this is also why I've talked to you about it and we talked on panels before. I will say that this is the first feature-length horror film produced by an American studio. There are other ones, there's The Devil's Castle or The Devil's House or whatever it is, 1896, a French film, but that's only 2 minutes. This is 3 hours of terror. And it's not terror in the sense of you got some, jump scares, you got all these things that are going on. It's building off of this weird, fucked up paranoia that people in power pass down to everyday white people in America. To the fact that when you have films like Nosferatu, it turns to being focused on the immigrant. D.W. Griffith has another film called Broken Blossoms, or the Yellow Boy and the Girl, or I can't remember what the alternate title is. But it's an anti-immigrant movie as well, because it's about this Chinese immigrant falling in love with a white woman, and it's basically the same as Birth of a Nation. It's just these immigrants are coming in and they're going to try and take your women and get them hooked on opium, or whatever the fears were at that time. Get them hooked on opium. The big fear of the jazz age was that, hey, your young white daughters, if they go to those jazz clubs, those Negro musicians are going to get hooked on reefer.
Shows what they know. All of our soccer moms got themselves hooked on opiates.
I know, right?
So I want to talk about the fear of this film really fast. We get a lot of, oh, that's not scary when we talk about films. And my response is always, fear is very individualized, and it's always about your position, right? The fear in this film is very expertly done. And I say that in the context of the time. Like, it wouldn't scare me today. But again, I'm a guy who happens to be white, not black. So maybe it is still fucking terrifying today. You can speak on that in a bit. But what I noticed most is stuff that we're still doing, white supremacists are still doing today. And that is Piedmont Street itself changes. So like every time that black people gain power, Piedmont Street gets more and more run down. It's a mess. It's not as nice as it was. And they're always trying to get it back to its glory. They're trying to make Piedmont great again, right?
Right.
And so I thought that was interesting, because it's the kind of thing that in a silent film you pay more attention to than you do in a normal film. You're usually stuck on the dialogue or how people are expressing things. But in this, you get to just sit back and really watch the background too. And I thought that was interesting because it's very subtle. It's not pointed out. It's not, look at the giant mess Piedmont Street became. It's just there. It's just things are starting to fall apart and they're not as nice. And that's fear. This is what happens when this comes to your neighborhood. And I think that that's huge. Then you have the almighty rape scene, of course. And I know we're going to cover this more. So just like it feels so slashery to me, like he's chasing her through the woods and she's in distress and there's somebody trying to save her, but will they get there in time? And then he gets there and she threatens to jump, And I literally wrote you and I was like, holy shit, she actually jumped. Because I was blown away by that. We wouldn't do that today. We have other ways to handle it. But you couldn't risk empowering a woman to save herself here either, right? So you have that fear that you won't be able to save, or if you're her, that no one's going to save you. And that one's much more in your face than the destruction of Piedmont Street, but it's still there. You have Silas Lynch. Huge fear factor with this guy. It's so overdone, it's ridiculous. But in the context of the time, I'll bet it worked really fucking well. Because he's kind of like you, but he's not. Right? Like, it's still that difference there. And what I really noticed with all of this is that they used fear more subtly than we do now. Like, not always. Like, Silas is very in your face and the rape scene is. But there's so many little things like the destruction of Piedmont. And white supremacists don't do that now. It's always in your face. It's they stole the election. Stop the steal. It's, whatever else is happening that they can possibly throw at us. It's always in your face. They're coming for your guns. They're doing this. It's all fear. And it's so driven now. And I kind of wonder how this film would be if it had been done in that same vein. Because so much of it already is, but there's still that subtlety. So I don't know. But what else do you like? What sticks out to you from the opposite point of view? Obviously, Like,
I was.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say
I'm
because there are a few things there. Because even when it comes to that rape scene, I mean, just go back to that. It's not just about her jumping to her death, right? It's not about anybody coming to save her or her actually being assaulted, sexually assaulted. It was that idea that if you're a white woman, get away, and if you can't get away, the only option for you is death. It's either rape by him or is death, because they're
death is the better option.
Yeah, because you protect your innocence, you protect yourself from being stained somehow. Because you know what, there's a lot more nobility in killing yourself to avoid that, as opposed to you are sexually assaulted and then no white man is going to want you. But then here's the kicker, James. There's then also the question of, were you actually resisting him? Because that becomes one of those things that gets thrown into some of the writings for that period, was that we know that these black men are beasts, they're subhuman, they're whatever type of ridiculous thing we want to go ahead and say about them is what we believe, right? So they're drawn or controlled by their sexual desires, right? But the fear was, for a lot of these guys who were drawing up some of these policies, was what if our white women want them? So they're in the back of their mind is always this thing of, well, she could tell me she was assaulted because that's a way of getting out of it. But then in the back of my mind, I'm always going to question, was she lying to get out of the situation where she put herself in a consensual sexual event with this man? Because that again was one of the things that some of these men were concerned with, was that their women would choose to be with them. So you have to drum up this idea of this black guy who's waiting in the bushes or in the dark corner or the alley, or he's in your closet waiting for you and he's going to attack you. So much so that was so built into Southern white women, especially, that when Gunnar Myrdal, he's a Swedish sociologist, or it might be Norwegian, but anyway, a Scandinavian sociologist came to America in the 1930s to study why the South hadn't fucking advanced since the 1860s, like economically, socially, politically, right? And he's a white man, and his grad assistant is black. So when he goes to the South, and he's like the kind of person you would want to hang out with, because he does not give a fuck about your opinion, because he's got the money from the Carnegie Mellon Institute at this time, or it might have been Carnegie Mellon University at the time, but anyway, or foundation. But he has benefactors who are giving this money because they want to figure out why the South has not progressed, why they haven't industrialized, why the economy hasn't gone anywhere, right? Because they're from afar in the Northeast wondering what the fuck has taken them so long. It didn't take us this long to develop in this area. Even California.
Do you know how much statues cost? Statues cost a lot.
Yeah, they apparently do. Only statues I respect, or the only thing on those pedestals I respect, are the horses, because those horses had to put up with some stupid shit. But when he was staying in some of these towns, they had set up kind of like Airbnb type situations. There was a sponsor in the town to receive him. It's typically a white family. Sometimes it would be a white woman, a widow, divorcee, whatever, right? So he would stay in the house, and his grad assistant would go stay with a black family. So he's like smoking his pipe or a cigar or something, but he's just sitting there and just listening. And he's one of those guys who, I'm going to let you fucking talk, because not only am I a sociologist, but I also have a little bit of psychology background. So he's just letting people talk to him, and they're telling him all these things that they're worried about. And in this one occasion, he's sitting with this white woman at her house, and she said, and he's telling her what his work is. He's like, I'm talking to the Negroes, I'm talking to white people and trying to figure out blah, blah, blah. And so she's like, oh, I don't understand why you can be around Negroes. I'm scared of them because I'm always worried that one of them is going to rape me. And so he just keeps letting her talk, and she just keeps talking about being raped and raped and raped and raped, right? So this guy, being a complete smartass, All right, I'm sorry. Well, not just smart ass, but turn it on her. Basically says, you seem to be talking about getting raped by black men a lot. It's like, why are you so fixated on that? And she says, well, that's all they care about. They just want to have sex with a white woman. That's what they care about. And so he basically says, Freud has said some things about this. And you're talking a lot about sex or forcible sex from a Negro. And Freud would say that we fear what we desire. And so he just, takes a puff of his pipe and keeps on going because it's like, checkmate, gotcha, motherfucker. And she looks at him and is like, I do not want to have sex with a Negro. And he makes some comment back to her about like, you sure talk a lot about having sex with Negro for somebody who doesn't want to have sex with a Negro.
I want you to know that in my head throughout this entire story, I just picture Detective Blanc from Knives Out, and it makes it so much better.
You know what? He kind of looked like him, just, an older version. But she then says, I'm calling the sheriff. You better get out of here. So he calls, his assistant and says, hey, this lady kicked me out because I was talking to her about this. And the black assistant's like, why the fuck would, I'm paraphrasing. It's like, why the fuck would you say that to a white woman? He's like, well, she kept talking about being raped by black men and black men wanting to have sex with her and stuff. And he's like, you can't say that here. And he just is kind of like, whatever. And they just go to the next town because he's like, no, I don't, like, what the fuck am I going to lose by asking you and challenging you on these things? And that comes up again in the film Soul Man with C. Thomas Howell, which I still say is one of the most underrated 80s movies about race. It ruined his career because people weren't ready for that discussion. But there's this scene where he's sitting at the dinner table with his girlfriend or the girl he's going out with. And the father or her father, her mother, and her brother all have different envisionings of what he is. Because they see a black guy. He's a white guy pretending to be a black guy. I mean, he's in blackface for the movie. But he's a white guy pretending to be a black guy because he wanted to get a scholarship. So he claimed to be black to get the scholarship and then took tanning pills to appear black. Because he was a rich kid and his dad cut him off. So he's like, oh, fuck it. Nobody's taking the scholarship. I'll pretend to be a black guy and go get it. So the dad sees him as a sex-crazed, abusive man. He's wearing like a pimp suit. His daughter's pregnant. He's sitting there eating watermelon. He's got his feet up on the table, right?
Is he wearing shoes?
He's wearing shoes, unlike in the movie. The son is enthralled with him because he looks at it and he sees Prince. Like, he just sees this guy oozing sexuality, playing an instrument, like being real fucking cool, right? And then the mom is sitting there and she has this sex vision because she's looking at him and, Mark is just eating his food. She looks at him and he's got like his shirt is open. You can see his chest. It's all steamy. You can hear, it seems like they're in the jungle and she's wearing this big, like, Gone with the Wind dress. Right. So he says, oh, all I've ever wanted in this world is to have sex with a white woman. And now I can. And like rips her top off. And she like comes out of this little stupor that she's in because she's sitting there thinking like, I might want to have sex with a black guy. It was that same thing that Gunnar Myrtle faced with this woman that was hosting him. And he's like, you're fucking telling me what you want, but you understand the social norms and mores of this area won't let you have it because they're telling you that it's wrong. And there's another, I guess, philosopher, you could put him in that category, Frantz Fanon, who wrote Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin, White Mask. And he talks, Black Skin, White Mask. And he talks about a similar thing. He said racism comes down to love and the fear that you love what you hate. So the whole thing about racism is these guys who are so racist or people who happen to be so racist, the real issue is they fear the possibility that they actually like that race, person, entity, whatever, and they can't handle it. So they internalize it, kind of like when people are like you have people who are closeted homophobes, but they're closeted And so they become very vicious towards other gay people, other people in the LGBT community. And what it turns out is that is who they, and they're so afraid of what is in them, and they're so afraid of who they are that they push it on to somebody else. And that's really what you have with a lot of this shit. It's, we want to be equal, but I'm afraid of what the fuck that would look like. And then you do also have people who are afraid of equality or afraid of proper representation, because then they'll realize, kind of like what I said with James Baldwin, that idea that your status is complete bullshit. I mean, going back to 1644 with a court case ruling that deemed that, you know, white women and black men, I mean, on all intents and purposes, it meant all black and all white can't. But in reality, it was white women and black men could not have sex with each other. And what was kind of laying under these rules was white men could do whatever the fuck they wanted. I mean, they could fuck white women, they could fuck black women, they could do whatever they wanted. Their marriages might not be recognized, but you can have sex and you can have offspring. But the thing that this movie starts to get into is examining whether they wanted to seriously, or they, you know, in our case, it looks comical, examining the racial fantasy that they've created, and this idea that there is such a thing as racial superiority or racial inferiority. And, you know, to go back when you're referencing the scene in the legislature, you know, that's a very telling thing. Or even when you're talking about Piedmont, it's a very telling representation, because I have to come up with bullshit reasons or false realities to justify why I should treat you differently. Because if you go all around this country or even different parts of the world, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, brown, Asian, indigenous, you know, from any nationality, right? You have parts of town of each of those ethnicities, each of those nationalities that is fucked up. And then you have parts of those towns with people from those backgrounds, ethnicities, nationalities that are perfectly fine. But the focus, at least when it comes to race, in this case with Piedmont, by showing that when the black people are in charge, it's fucked up. When the white people are in charge, it's fine. It lends itself to arguing why segregation should still be in place, or why it should work, and why we should keep it around. Because if we have segregation, we prevent them, the other, from moving into our neighborhoods and fucking them up. We keep them where they are, then anything that's fucked up stays there. It's like you know, the containment policy with communism. If we just leave it there, it's just going to tend to itself. It'll be fine. We can't let it spread to us. And there are numerous articles from this time period speaking about black people moving into the areas of town, or speaking of Mexicans moving into parts of Los Angeles. And there's one article called "The Plague of Los Angeles." And in the news, I'm sorry, not in the news article, in the article itself, it shows a comparison of a White House, a typical White House in Los Angeles versus a typical Mexican house in Los Angeles. And they are vastly different. And is done so by design, because we want to keep the Mexicans on this side of Los Angeles. We don't want them to come here. So if they start moving here, you better raise a fuss about it, so that they know what their place is. If black people start moving to this side of town, we better let them know that they're not welcome in one way or another. And this film, the really horrific part of this film is the way that people respond to it. And the way they respond to it is they identify with the characters and start any of those racial paranoias or racial anxiety that they have. Not to be confused with economic anxiety, which is, you know, the bullshit that people have been researching the last 5 years. It was racial anxiety, because their anxiety is brought forth in this film, and they become more fearful or more anxious as a result of the film, and start looking for organizations that can protect the status quo. And so you see a boom of the KKK after this film. You have an increase in lynchings and racialized violence. In 1919 is affectionately known as Red Summer, because of the amount of race riots or racial attacks that take place. One started simply because in Chicago, a black boy swam too close to the white part of the beach. And so the white patrons on the beach threw rocks at him, and he ended up drowning. And then, of course, the city broke out in violence because, the white patrons on the beach did not like the fact that he swam too close to the white side. Yes.
How is that even slightly a reasonable response? Like, I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying you're saying it is. I'm saying, like, in your head, how do you ever think that that's the rational response to this? Because if I was in this situation and if I felt the way they feel, I feel like I would leave. Like, wouldn't I make more distance between myself and that? Why would I want
You think that, but remember the in this film, it's about not giving up another inch and fighting back, right? So for those patrons on the beach, they're making this argument that if we give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So if this one black boy swims over here, and it's the same thing with the schools when schools get integrated. If he swims over here just by a foot, that's a foot of beach of access of waterfront that we've now lost. So if it's just one, then you know what? Tomorrow it's going to be 10. And then there are going to be a lot more black people. Then us white people in Chicago, we can't go to the beach.
Wouldn't you worry about his blood getting on your land? I mean, geez, I certainly wouldn't want that.
Look, we're talking about irrational people striking out against children, right? And it's one of those things that's just beyond ridiculous when we look at it from our own eyes in this time period. But for that time period, they thought it was completely rational. And even to go back to the sex thing. I talked about how the fear is about integration. I'm sorry, not about integration, but about miscegenation and race mixing. But it's not just about, black and white genitalia. It's about the offspring, which is even more fucked up to think about, right? So it's not about, hey, a black guy and a white woman, or a white man and a black woman. It's about what they end up creating. And so you see from Silas, right? This guy is what's known as the tragic mulatto, and you have a lot of them in stories. Nella Larson in her short story, I guess, novella, Passing, has the same thing where it's about trying to come to grips with who you are, right? Trevor Noah from South Africa, he talks about, his birth was a crime. It was a literal crime for him to be born because of his parents' status. His dad being white, his mom being black, being born in South Africa. But the same thing happened here where, if people are having sex and there's no children, there's no evidence of them having sex. But if those two people have sex and it results in a pregnancy and results in a child, you can't deny that these two people, you can deny that those two people had sex, but you can't deny that there's something going on with the people who created that child. As far as, if it's a white mother and the child comes out a little brown, somebody's going to look at you strangely. And if you are a black woman and a child comes out lighter skinned than you, people are going to look at that a little strangely and say, like, the only white man that's been around here is Mr. So-and-so, and he's got a wife. Oh, okay. He likes a little chocolate. But the genius of this film, and I hate equating that with this, is the storytelling. And it's the way that is able to hone in on the fears of white America. But truthfully, it also hits on black fears, right? And that's talking about the way that black people are represented, because black people who, again, can't see this film in a lot of cases. Now, if you can pass for white, you can get in. But if your skin tone or even if your hair doesn't pass, the brown paper bag or even the pencil test, you're not going to get access to that theater. You're not going to have a print available to your movie theater. But those who are going to see this are going to look at it and say, like, I don't want to be represented like this. And then two, all these white folks are getting a little excited about this movie and cheering at the wrong shit. Like when the Klan starts riding through town, this is not something I'm comfortable with. And like
You
I said,
mean the Confederacy saves the day?
Yeah, and that's and here's the really fucked up thing. I mean, we're talking about a lot of fucked up things, but here's the really fucked up thing, and this is what I will say. This is when I will concede this one aspect of U.S. history. There are people who aren't going to agree with me on this, but you know what? I got the microphone right now, so I'm going to say it. The South lost the Civil War, but they didn't lose.
Whoa, what?
No, they lost the Civil War, but they didn't lose. Well, I'm just saying the war came to an end. So there was a surrender. You know, they lost the Civil War, but my argument is they didn't lose. They lost the battle, the battles. They lost the war itself, but because there wasn't a reconstruction plan, a long-term reconstruction plan, Southerners, and especially Southerners of means, got to rewrite the history. And they got to control the narrative for so long. They got to control the narrative up until the 1960s and 70s, James. To the point where TV shows that I grew up with, I would like to time travel and kick the living shit out of myself for watching them as a kid. We had TV shows like The Dukes of Hazzard, and there was a mini series called The Blue and the Gray. Patrick Swayze was in it, and there were a couple other people when they were pretty young. They turned
my mom loved it.
Yeah, they turned the Civil War into a soap opera where it was, they romanticized so much stuff about the South. I got in trouble with my dad because I went to the Vicksburg battlefield on a field trip when I was a kid, when I was living in Mississippi briefly here. And we went there, and I came home, and my dad was like, "Oh, tell me about your field trip." It's like, "Yeah, Dad, went to this field trip, and we got to see where all the Yankees came and tried to defeat the South." And my dad's like, "What the fuck did you just say?" I mean, my dad used to say stuff like that anyway. It's like the Yankees, and he's like, "Don't you ever say some stupid shit like that again." I was like, what are you talking about?" He's like, "That's what these fucking rednecks say. That's what they say. You're not a redneck, so don't say that." And the thing is that I didn't realize is that was the shit my teachers were saying. They're like, the Yankees came down here and they did this, they did that, and they did this. And I'm like, what the fuck? I was like, okay, I don't understand what I did that was wrong. So he explained, I think I was in third grade at the time, but he explained to me, he was like, no, this is what happened. This is what was wrong. This is how it's being taught. And it's completely inaccurate. And, he grew up in the South. He grew up in Louisiana and lived there until he went to the Army. And he was just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, none of this shit has been changed. It's not different. And this is back in the 80s. I'm living in Mississippi currently in 2021. And I got to tell you, I'm just as frustrated because there are segments of the population that do believe the lost cause narrative, but they also still believe the birth of a nation, events that are captured in the film, or just the idea of that police stops themselves are validated because if you get stopped by the police, you must have done something wrong. I've been stopped by the police for literally not doing anything. I've been stopped by the police for doing stupid shit before, but that's no reason to be treated any differently. It'd be treated differently based on your skin.
What if you were, I don't know, storming the Capitol and they pushed you down and maced you? Is that reasonable?
Here's what I will say about this.
Yes.
Look, we might gain some listeners, and hopefully none of our listeners were at the Capitol doing that shit, because we think if you listen to us, you have better taste and common sense. But I'm telling you right now, is somebody who grew up in a military family, who has police officers in his family, other military personnel in his family, I cannot legally say what I would have done if I had been a Capitol Police officer, but I will say this. It wouldn't have been pretty, because I'm all for doing the right thing, when things are called for, but if there is a horde that looks very reminiscent of a fucking zombie invasion, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that I go home that day. I'm definitely not going to, I'm not shaking hands. I'm not taking selfies. I'm not, doing whatever some of those guys were doing. I would hope I would do the same thing that the one police officer did. And of course, his name escapes me. But I would hope that I would do the same thing that he did, as far as I'm going to think quickly and I'm going to lead these guys down the wrong corridor. And what was great to me is, and this was kind of the most screwed up thing about that whole story. He knew that he could use himself as bait.
Yeah, no, that's the first thing that I noticed with it. And God, like that realization ripped me up more than anything. If it had been a white cop trying to do the same fucking thing, I don't know that it would have worked.
Oh, I guess I should. I didn't want to get his name wrong. Eugene Goodman was the officer, or is the officer's name. And I will say this, that man deserves every fucking medal available. Not just for his restraint, but for his quick thinking. And then I'm sure he's had to deal with a lot of shit on that job way before that day. Yeah. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to say, the reason that I brought this up and the reason I made the joke to begin with is you were talking about, oh, there must be some reason they pulled you over. Narrative all the time. It's always, well, what did he do? And I look at this woman who was shot storming the Capitol, trying to have an insurrection. And the story that I get is, oh, she was in the military. She loved her country. She loved her family. Okay? The story I get with every black man killed anywhere by people in uniform is, did you know 8.5 years ago, this guy smoked a cigarette that wasn't even his? Yeah. Why? I know why, but it bothers me to no end that the narrative changes based on this. And the reason I brought this up is these people were legitimately breaking, I would argue, one of the biggest rules in the fucking country. Like, there were people planning on shooting Pelosi in the head. So I would think assassination of third in line is a big fucking deal. And that you probably, deserve to be arrested, and you probably did something. And these are the people that are always, well, why did he get stopped? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? And none of that's being asked right now. These fucking people that say this are silent as fuck in this regard. And it makes me insane. So I can't imagine how anyone else feels. And so while I was making a joke, I was legitimately trying to make a point as well.
Well, here's the thing. And what it really comes down to, and this, again, goes back to a bunch of readings that I've been doing over the past couple of weeks, it's the idea of protecting white womanhood. And you see that in the film. And this is one of these things that kind of carries over. I mean, it's one of these things that exists way before this film is made. It's one of those central talking points when when they're even discussing emancipation of slaves prior to the Civil War. The interviews that I've looked at years ago, but interviews that I've looked at all said the same thing of, well, if they're free, then they're not going to, if they don't have anything to do, they're probably going to come for my daughter. And it was so ingrained that that's what you had to worry about was, hey, if they're not doing something, if we're not keeping them busy, they're just going to go back to their carnal nature. They're going to be, desiring out sexual conquest and, whatever ridiculous things that they've come up with. And you see the same thing here because with Gus going after the woman, right? The Klan then what was her name? Flora. when he goes after Flora and Flora like jumps off the cliff and all this stuff, right? Gus gets captured by the Klan. And what's crazy is Silas Lynch, who is supposed to be the villain of the film, wants the Klan to be cracked down upon because they murdered Gus, right? So now we have this biracial, we have this mulatto, public official who is now going to say, I'm not only just going to defend a rapist, but now I'm going to make what he did somewhat, what you fear, I'm going to make this legal. So you don't have to worry about, black guys raping your daughters. Now they can marry them. And if you're wearing Klan stuff, we'll execute you. Now they're playing around, or I should say D.W. Griffith is playing around with some history here, because the U.S. government had passed what were known as the Enforcement Acts because the Klan was terrorizing people, white and black. So if you're a white person, was a moderate or a progressive, or if you associated with black people, or if you gave black people better wages, you'd be attacked. If you're a black person who voted, or you spoke out, or you're politically active, right? You'd be firebombed. You'd be shot. Any of these number of things would have happened. And the one thing I will say about the Klan, they're very fucking creative with all their nicknames. I mean, very creative with all their names, right? But the one thing that I will never give them respect for, I will never, ever call them brave. Because they are one of the most cowardly organizations in the history of the United States. I mean, look at they preyed on people incognito. So I've got to put a hood on. I mean, the one thing I will say about the Capitol people, they decided not to wear hoods. That was great. I mean, it's great for the FBI and for all the biometric scans and face recognition software. I love that. I mean, my hat's off to them, or my hood's off to them.
My mask is off to them.
Because, hey, you felt that was what you want to do, and you went there knowing full on who you were with your phone and your GPS device. So great. But you don't need the 5G or the COVID vaccine with the microchips from Bill Gates. But it's phenomenal that this is the way that, the mind of D.W. Griffith and the Klan at this period was. It was all about, we're the ones who are being attacked. It's our rights. We're trying to do the right thing and protect these women and protect society and keep things in order. We're the ones who are the good guys, but look at big government. Just like in the Civil War, the federal government, the state government is cracking down on us and stopping us from doing our duty as men. Because there's a whole lot of shit about manhood and masculinity wrapped up in this. Because if you are a man and you can't defend your women, you're not a man. There's no possible way you could call yourself a man if you can't defend your wife, your daughters, your family. And if you let this go on, which again is also what you see with the people going to the Capitol, it was about them trying to assert their manhood and protect whatever they viewed as being whatever their cause was. And you see that again with the way that the one woman who was shot and I think the other woman who was trampled, how they get represented, where it was like, these were innocent people. They were going and they were just participating. They were protesting. This was their First Amendment right. And I have to say, she was in the military. And I will say one thing that I learned in the military, which is you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
She's in the military. She should know better than anybody.
You definitely should know, because there's this thing called the Universal Code of Military Justice, which if she had lived, her ass was going to jail, because it applies even after you've left the military. So I'm not storming shit.
So I want to bring this back to the KKK for a minute. One of the things I found fascinating in this is how quickly they skipped forming the KKK. He literally sees these kids who wear a white sheet and scare black kids, and he goes, what a great idea. And in the next scene, the KKK is fully formed. There's been no struggle to make it happen. We haven't had to convince anybody. Everyone just signed right up. Like, there's no process to it at all. And I thought that was fascinating. I don't want to see another hour of him going door to door convincing people, but I thought it was odd, right? But then I know you've talked about this in the past, so like bring me up to speed on this. Women in this protect themselves by being the backbone of the KKK. They're cleaning the sheets, they're ironing them, they're making them. They're literally doing everything because, these men can't fucking do anything for themselves. That's why they're in the Klan to begin with. And so walk me through a woman's role in the KKK, even though she's not a member.
Oh, you just set me up for another recommended reading. All right, kids, pay attention. There's a book called Women in the Klan. It's a whole lot better than it sounds, but it talks about it answers a question that you just asked or it just posed. And the truth is, women in the Klan, and this is going back to the turn of the century, the turn of the 19th to the 20th, and the first quarter of the 20th century, women were actually angry. White women were actually mad that they couldn't participate in the KKK. And men in the KKK let their wives know, this is a man's organization. We're here to protect women, white Christianity, our families. We're going to protect America. We're going to make America first. Or, in some other terms, make America great again. So these women actually got mad at their husbands and decided, and this is skipping ahead, I highly recommend reading Women and the Klan, because these women, in some cases, wanted to actually sue their husbands to get into the KKK. What? Think about how fucking ridiculous that is. Like, you are upholding racial segregation. You can't vote yet, right? You're upholding racial segregation. You don't have the 19th Amendment yet to vote. I mean, in some states you can vote in certain elections, but there's no nationwide protection for voting. They actually want to pursue legal cases against their husband. I mean, these are rare occurrences. It wasn't, every town in every state. But there were some women that went so far as they wanted to actually sue their husbands in order to get admitted into the Klan. What the women did is there were various organizations at one point, but there eventually becomes this group called the WKKK, which obviously is the women's KKK. Their thing was, well, our men are supposed to protect us. Our job is to protect the family. We'll be assuming our maternal duties. So we've got our duties as far as taking care of our husbands' robes and feeding our children and all this other shit and sewing the robes because they did make the robes themselves. But what's funny is they go so far as, we're going to make sure that, we're speaking up on women's issues. So this fucking organization was a feminist organization that focused on, we want to make sure that, well, you know what? We need to get women the right to vote. So they started organizing things like, suffrage meetings. They started organizing temperance meetings. So those of you who don't know, temperance was basically the precursor to prohibition. So they started talking about, we don't want our husbands to drink. So we need to push the temperance movement to get alcohol banned in certain places. So they went so far as even fighting against the Catholic Church over orphans, because their fear was, well, these orphans are going to go to the Catholic churches and become Catholic, and we can't have that shit. So we're going to take these kids from the orphanages and take them to nice Protestant orphanages so they can be raised right. They were fucking ridiculous about so many things. And these women went so far as to control who could be hired for certain jobs. So a bus driver, this bus driver has to be Christian, but he can't be a Catholic. So the bus driver that we have, going forward, the bus driver that we have has to be a white male Protestant. And then it was like nurses. They would go to the hospital and make sure that the nurses and medical staff were all white Christians, but white Protestants. They went even so far as a school where they made sure that the teachers, they would check their background, their ethnicities to make sure that they didn't have any Italians that happened to be there, because, that's two things that you can't have. One, they're Italian, and two, they're probably Catholic. But yeah, these women were lockstep with these men as far as the racial paranoia, the xenophobia, the anti-Catholicism, or the anti-Catholic measures that they had. And what's really striking is, this film, I think, was filmed in South Carolina or North Carolina, and it's supposed to be Georgia that's being represented in the film. The Klan had chapters nationwide, but they had a heavy presence in the Midwest in places like Indiana and Ohio, Illinois. They had they had a good presence nationwide. At a certain point, at least on the low end, it's estimated that they had like 3 million members in the 1920s.
Wow!
And this is just 5 years after this movie came out. There's a rebirth at Stone Mountain in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which has a god awful eyesore on the side of it that features 3 traitors. One of which who said, "Don't build a monument to me." Hey, I know what we'll do. We'll carve your fucking face into the side of a mountain.
Do you think those numbers are a direct result of this film?
Yes, and yes. And I think it's an issue of,
what a twist. It's not where I thought that was going. All right, go ahead.
I think it's an issue where, you've got the power of this film because it gets released, then it gets re-released and re-released and re-released to where it's still playing in theaters in the 1940s, and there's still people protesting it. There are white and black people protesting the film because they're like, this is not a good look for us. This is not a good film. This is not something that is representing America, or at least the America that we should be talking about or should be proud of. And what's really striking is, after that film hit in February of 1915, you had a boom as far as the amount of people that joined the Klan, right? But then you had people that joined the Klan because now they saw the Klan as a good organization to be part of. Basically because of the stuff that they were arguing, which was, we're an American Christian organization. We believe in America first, and we're anti-communist, because you had your first Red Scare right after World War I. So you had people who were already afraid of immigrants, and you're afraid of foreign ideologies like communism. They saw this organization as something that they could participate in that was going to protect their way of life. For a lot of people, their fear is losing their perceived identity, right? And that's what they had to deal with was, if I'm going to retain and protect my identity, I have to be part of an organization that's going to do so. And, they need numbers. They need they need people as part of this organization to achieve their mission. And like I said, it's the same type of effect that Triumph of the Will had as far as getting more people behind the Nazi cause. So much so that we had people in this country that associated with, and we had an American Nazi Party that met at Madison Square Garden, or had one of their rallies at Madison Square Garden. And they believed in the same thing. They were like, well, this is what we need to do with this country. So, it's just one of those things where you look at it and you're like, I'm just glad I don't live in that same time period. We have kind of the same shit going on, but I'm just glad I don't live in that time period.
So there's one part of this film that truly confuses the shit out of me.
All right.
And so after Lincoln is assassinated, what's with the my best friend Lincoln thing? Like, did I misunderstand this? Was it like one of the Northerners who had come south, or like it felt like one of the Southerners was totally destroyed that Lincoln was dead? Like, what am I missing here?
Well, here's the thing that was going on with Lincoln, and this just may be my, I don't know, my opinion about it. Lincoln didn't want to punish the South. And the idea is that the one thing that John Wilkes Booth did, good and bad, in the same thing, is that he shot Lincoln. It's good. I mean, it's bad, obviously, because he assassinated.
You got kicked off TikTok for.
I got kicked off TikTok for giving reasons as to why Ronald Reagan was a shitty person and president.
And now you're talking about good reasons.
No. I said what he did had good and bad effects, right? Bad because he killed Lincoln. He's one of the he was a polarizing figure at that time, but he's history's, or at least American history's, one of, well, shit, I think every time there's a rating, he's number one or number two. But he's revered as one of America's greatest presidents, right? So bad because you kill him, and bad because of the timing that you kill him. But good in the sense that Lincoln was going to take it easy on the South. There's that whole speech about malice towards none, because all he really wanted to do was, you guys lost the war, come the fuck back. We're passing the 13th Amendment, sign this shit, no more slavery, we're done, we're good, right? So you got that aspect. But for the South, it was a bad thing because there was a group in Congress known as the Radical Republicans that fucking wanted to destroy the South. And I mean, for good reasons. They're like, we don't want them to ever try and do some shit like this again. So anybody associated with Confederacy, whether you're in office, is a public office holder, or you happen to be an officer in the military, you ain't getting shit. If you were a benefactor of the military, as far as, you paid to get your sons out of the war, you supported your own little militia or army, whatever. They wanted anybody who was a landholder with a significant amount of slaves, like, motherfucker, you are not going to live to see the day when you will have, a pot to piss in. Like, they wanted to seriously punish the South. And I loved reading the shit that they said about, the white Southerners, or the white wealthy landholding Southerners, and what they wanted to do to them. I mean, there were some times that they wanted to actually parade them out and hold trial for all of them. But again, Lincoln didn't want to do any of that because he's like, I can't run a country that's so divided already. We went to war and now you come back. I can't punish you guys, because if I punish you, I punish you too severely, that's not going to make things better in the long run. I gotta heal the divide. I gotta heal this country. Now, this is completely different than, pushing people to have an insurrection and then saying, no, it's okay. Let's go for unity. I didn't mean any of that shit. But the people that followed him, whether that was the administrators, as far as those military zones that you had during Reconstruction, or you had Andrew Johnson, or any of the other people that were in, people like Thaddeus Stevens, who was a great legislator, a great speaker, and he was one of those people who's like, no, fuck these Southern sons of bitches. You guys started this. We can punish you whatever fucking way we want to. But you had a good number of them that wanted this. So a lot of the white Southerners, and especially people like D.W. Griffith, who's producing this film and is, absorbing all this stuff, and white Southerners who are watching the film, and white Southerners who are already believing this stuff, don't necessarily like Lincoln, but they understand that Lincoln wasn't the one who put black people in power. So when the Confederacy lost and then Lincoln was murdered, the Reconstruction plan itself involved disenfranchising a shitload of white people, as far as landholders, people who had been in office, people who had anything to do with the Confederacy, disenfranchising them by taking their voting rights away and taking property away in a good number of cases. So when the Freedmen showed up, the Freedmen's Bureau organized, voter drives and, of course, holding elections and things like. You saw a high number of black people that were in state legislatures, and of course those that were sent to Congress. And what a lot of white Southerners felt they lost was, their standing. Like, now, what the fuck am I? These black people are now in charge of things. Except for, a couple of cases where white militias decided that they were going to overthrow their own local governments to get rid of the black leaders that happened to be there. There was a couple of cases in North Carolina or South Carolina. I think one or two in Louisiana. Mississippi is always very interesting as far as how they deal with things. But you had parts of Mississippi that seceded from the secession. So, which is another interesting aspect of the Civil War, Reconstruction, the South, and how fucking nuts U.S. history is for the most part.
Huh. What time are we at?
1:31. Well, I guess 1:32.
All right, so trying to figure out how to phrase my question. All right, I'm going to jump into it. Here we go. All right, so in the impact the film had on rejuvenating the KKK, and this is widely talked about. There's books about it. There's countless articles, and just how influential it was. Within like 5 years, like you said, they went to like 3 million members. Mm-hmm. Very, very much documented that this film is a reason why. I want to look at what I perceive as another racist impact that this film had. And okay. I have no documentation to back this up because I've been thinking about it while we've been recording, and I don't know. So I just want to know how you feel about this. I look at where Hollywood is today. And a couple years ago, there's only white people at the Oscars, right? Mm-hmm. And we all know this is a problem. We all know there's a couple black superheroes. We all know there's a couple black horror films. We know this is a problem. And I am a big believer, as you know, that horror is about the seeds that we plant and then how they grow, right? Like things stick with you once they're in your brain. My personal feeling is that this film is a huge seed for Hollywood. This is the time when feature films were starting. It made massive money by being a whites are superior movie. And to me, that's a seed to where Hollywood is today. Think about that theory. You know what? Do you see a correlation?
I can, because if you're going to say that it's the seed that's been planted, I mean, you've got a lot of control of Hollywood at that time by white actors, producers, things like and studio heads, right? So at this time, and there's this one filmmaker, not too many of his films have survived, but a couple of them you might be able to find on YouTube. But his name is Oscar Micheaux, and he's a black filmmaker, black producer, and he decided, well, I don't like the shit that you guys are making. I'm going to make something for people like me. So he makes there's a movie called Enemy at the Gates, or Within Our Gates. I'm sorry, Within Our Gates. And of course, I'm forgetting some of the other films that he has. But if you Google Oscar Micheaux, and I'll put up some links to the titles of his films on social media. But you had that, but his film producing and studio career wasn't long lived. And the sad thing is, what you see in this film is the when black people are present, it's to show inferiority. When people from those backgrounds would tell you, this is how you can make a movie about us. And even, when you talked about the Oscars So White scandal or period, that was a complaint I had from friends of mine, colleagues, was one that I agree with, I understand, but then as a historian, I'm like, no, I still want to see some of those things. And it was the movies that you see that are critically acclaimed or seem to have no problem getting made are slave movies and civil rights movies. And that's more of a reflection on U.S. society as opposed to filmmaking, because the film industry is going to pay attention to what people are probably interested in or are knowledgeable about, right? They're not going to always stick out their necks for it, saying like, here's this obscure moment of history that no one knows about, so we're going to invest like $40 million in it, and you know what, fuck it, if we don't make our money, we won't make our money. Whereas what's safe is we'll make a movie like 12 Years a Slave or Selma or Nate Parker's version of the Nat Turner revolt or the Nat Turner uprising. So what it comes down to is really our own historical knowledge, where there's not, I mean, shit, we just got a Harriet Tubman movie, I think last year or the year before. But it comes down to our own historical knowledge, where there are so many things that people aren't aware of that it has to come up from within the public. It has to be a popular book or it has to gain some traction to when Hollywood then is going to decide, hey, we're going to make a movie about, oh yeah, there were these black women that happened to be working for NASA. They were mathematicians and engineers. Holy shit, nobody knows about this. And then, seeing that people are receptive to stories that, I mean, there's still a civil rights movie, but it's seeing that people are receptive to stories that involve a lot of depth about people that aren't white. Whereas to get a black superhero movie like Black Panther, I wouldn't even say you had to do much. You just had to trust that the audiences were going to want to see it, because it has been so long since, how many Batmans have we had before Black Panther came out? I mean, we're on our 6th or 7th different Batman now?
At least. Yeah.
But, it's one of those things of realizing that there are audiences of different backgrounds, different ethnicities out there, and understanding what their needs are, what, how you can represent them on film. And even to the point where, with Jordan Peele's Get Out and Us and other projects that he's involved in, that's opening the door for so many creators of color and so many new voices that probably wouldn't have been paid attention to or looked at if he hadn't had the success with the movies that he had. And it's one of those things where you get a good, I don't want to say one, you get good black movies, good Hispanic movies, good Asian movies, or at least movies with Asian characters or Asian actors and performers. But it seems like it's not reflective of the population that you have, to where, what are we looking at? About 30% Latino and Hispanic population in the United States. I think it's around 12, 13 for African Americans. But when you look at the films that are being produced, the movies that are being produced, and even television lineups, like, those numbers still aren't there. And in all honesty, our entertainment should look like our population. And even more so than that, our government should look like our population. And it sure as hell doesn't. So, I mean, I don't think it's just the movies. I think it's a bigger thing of there isn't enough of a push. I'm sorry. There hasn't been enough of a push up until probably, I would say, the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, I think there's been a dramatic shift. But even with that shift and that increase, there were people complaining, almost like the Boston busing, where it was like, oh, the minorities are getting everything. We got one superhero. Like, there was one, it was Black Panther. That's it. So at least for now, I mean, Blade, yes, counts. Meteor Man counts. There are other black superheroes. But as far as one where there was that massive appeal and that great audience that went, because I went to the movie. I took my mother to go see it. She hadn't seen a single Marvel movie. She could not give a shit about Marvel superhero movies. But the fact that they had a black superhero, she loved it. She was like, this movie is outstanding. It's great. Oh my gosh, look at the hair and the costume. And my mom is not a person who gives a damn about hair and costumes. Like, there are people throughout America and throughout the rest of the world that need to see stuff like that, because you've already set the bar. I mean, the bar was set in 1915 with this movie of white people can be the heroes even when they're the villains, right? Or we can go ahead and create the other. It doesn't matter, they don't have to be black. They could be an immigrant. They could be Catholic. They could be Irish. They could be Asian. We can set someone else up as the other, and that becomes part of their identity. A white character can be good, bad, male, female, evil, benevolent, whatever. But they're not going to be defined as one of those because you're going to see the variations, the variety that there is, as opposed to making someone one-dimensional. And that's what you fucking have for the longest time with, especially black characters or even, white people in blackface for the characters.
Well, and I think that's one of the big things that I'm looking at when I talk about this film being a seed for where we are now. I think what you just said, the entire, there's the other, right? Well, when a film concentrates on black families and black communities and black, I'm just using black, it could be whatever. But when we do that, who becomes the other? Who's the scary one now? Who's the outsider who can't be the protagonist? Like, what do you mean that I have to somehow identify with these people? And for some reason, that's really hard for white people in a lot of ways. And I don't understand it because I'm not a like super hot dude, but like I can still identify with super hot dudes on this screen. So I can definitely identify with black people on the screen, and I can identify with Asians on the screen. And I don't understand this fucking disconnect. I don't understand how you can't identify with somebody just because of skin color. Now, in the reverse of that, when we talk about representation and we talk about how important it is for young kids to see someone who looks like them, that's not the same thing as what I'm saying. I know it sounds very similar, but I'm saying I'm used to everybody on screen having skin like mine. And yet, if I watch a single movie where somebody doesn't look like me, I can find something else I identify with. These kids always have to look for some little thing they can identify with. You, as a black man, have to look for, like, you have to work harder to find something that represents you in a white person on screen. A white person, just see a white person, except it's everybody. It's fucking everybody.
And I was gonna say, what the white character it's typically that universal thing, right? Now, I could understand it if there's a black character, or whatever, and there's like a culturally specific thing that gets brought up, like Denzel Washington when they were doing Fences, and he was asked because I think he directed it. But they were asking a question, or he made sure that there was a black director. I can't remember if he directed it or not. But he was being asked about directing about the film and about having a black director. But again, I think he might have directed it at the time. And he said it was important to have a black director for this film. And the person was like, "Well, what do you mean?" It's like, because if we're having this film that's about a black family in Pittsburgh at this time period, I'm a man of a certain age. I know what that kitchen smelled like. And at that moment, like, my wife and I were watching this interview, and I was like, holy shit, I got exactly what the fuck he meant. My wife was like, what are you talking about? She's like, the hair grease. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like the little girls, like before church or whatever, going to my grandparents' house in the summer, like they put that hot comb on the stove. And he said that it was that, I need somebody who's participating in this project that knows what a hot comb sounds like when it touches a black girl's hair. And I was like, fuck, I understand what the fuck he said. And the journalist was like, what do you mean? He's like, there's a certain sound it makes. There's a certain smell in the air. And I can't describe it. The only people that know this are people who went through it. And I think I might have jokingly said to her, it's like, God damn, I just felt my scalp burn just from this conversation. She's like, what are you talking? It's like, my mom used to use a hot comb on my head when I was a kid. She's like, what the fuck? And so we went through this little cultural exploration. I told her, it's like, well, this is how you would straighten your hair, or this, you'd even have a hot curler that you would put on the stove. And there was this blue hair dressing gel that you'd have to use. And so getting into that stuff, it was one of those things that when you talk about having, not having to watch a film, but watching a film that has characters of color, right? There are some cultural things that are going to be specific, but there are also going to be universalities. But even more important it is for me or a child of my background during this time period to see somebody that looks like them on film is for somebody who doesn't look like them to see somebody that looks like that black kid or looks like that Asian kid or that Latino kid on film, because the track record is so fucking horrible as far as representing people, non-white characters or non-white performances, that it's almost laughable, because you look back at a bunch of stuff and you're like, God damn, I hate the fucking character Wormser in Revenge of the Nerds. And then somebody will say, well, why? It's like, because they emasculated a black man. It wasn't about him being gay. They completely emasculated him. They took all power away from him. And the one time that they have black people there, it's the black fraternity that they become part of. And then you see the strong figure who's the head of the chapter, head of the fraternity itself. And they start playing music and start smoking weed. And his assistant is like, oh yeah, let me smoke some weed with you too. So even though he's he's in a position of power, they kind of demean who he is. I mean, it's a comedy, yes, but they kind of demean who he is, because it's kind of like, you guys want to be taken seriously, but you're going to start handing my assistant, my number two guy weed, and now we're going to start smoking joints with you. Like, it creates this bad representation, almost like with Soul Man, where you're getting to see three different versions of a black person, and all three of those versions are wrong. Because for as bad as the movie is, with the timing at which it came out, the great thing that comes out is the character Mark is no different as a white person as he is as a black person. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people missed, was they were expecting something different, so that when he's associating with other black people, for the most part, he goes in and tries to, one up black people. Like, I'm going to come in and be as black as possible. And you see all these other black scholars and like, what the fuck is wrong with you? We're here for studying. We're here for school. Whatever. He like walks in and is like, what up, blood? What's going on? What's going on, G? And so he's trying to throw out all this vernacular, and they look at him like, the fuck is wrong with you? Like, we don't act like that. And just by going by, the lack of access and lack of exposure that a lot of people have, one-on-one with somebody of a different background, different ethnicity, even different economic background, is only bridged through entertainment. And when your only bridge is through entertainment, you pick up on this shit, and sometimes it's just plain shit, but you pick up on the shit that is going to get the most traction. The stuff that's going to go viral, the stuff that, it's going to make a lot of money or whatever, because there's stuff that I've seen where I think it was, Instagram or whatever social media is out there. And the impressions that white kids have about black people is almost no different than it was in the 1930s during the Clark Doll test, which is they see the image, but they don't see the reality. So they see a distorted image. And that's what this film offers. It's just distorted image after distorted image after distorted image, which then gets used to help validate creating further divide within the country, or further segregation, or support for laws that are going to prevent, simple shit like when rock and roll becomes popular. Hey, you know what? We can have rock and roll in this club, but we can't have black kids and white kids dancing on the same night. And this is, the 1950s in Philadelphia. People are saying this. We're going to play rock and roll, but we're not going to play it to a mixed audience. This whole idea that if you happen to have these kids mix, is going to be the downfall of society. If this black family moves to your neighborhood, it's going to turn to shit. If you have a black legislator, he's not going to do a good job. to the point where there are a couple of people that I'm glad I don't associate with on social media anymore. But when Trudeau in Canada was, naming his cabinet, and at the time it was like, this is the most diverse cabinet in the history of Canada, the most diverse cabinet in a Western nation, right? This guy pops in and is like, how do we know any of them are qualified for those jobs? And my response was, how do you assume that they're not qualified? Obviously, he was looking for people who were qualified, and there were people of different racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds that were included. I don't think his qualifications were, you know what, I need a Sikh to be on my cabinet. Or, you know what, I need to check this box off for a woman. Every last person was qualified, had very great credentials. But that's something that we absorb, and as Joe Biden assumes the presidency, I'm sure is going to be a discussion as well as how qualified is this black candidate or black nominee for this position, or Jewish position, or I'm sorry, Jewish nominee for this position, or a woman, or whatever. I'm sure that same thing's going to happen because we're just coming out of a presidency where no one was fucking qualified for the jobs that they had. But
I mean, I hope we're coming out of it. We're recording this beforehand. It's hard to tell.
No, I said coming out. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see.
Maybe some horses and some dudes on horseback and sheets will be riding to the Capitol, and maybe the National Guard will, stand their ground.
Well, only part of the National Guard, because they'll all have to be vetted, because that's where the fuck we are now.
Well, you know what? I am perfectly fine with them vetting the National Guard, and I'm going on record of saying, because I meant to include this earlier with our discussion, because of the history of the Klan in this country, starting after the Civil War and then having a rebirth in the 19-teens after this film, and then having a lull and another rebirth again, and then you had the David Duke resurgence, and then there was a resurgence again in 2009. I don't know. I think there was a black guy who got elected president, and there were a bunch of racist guys who, were upset. So you had more right-wing groups form, or terrorist organizations increase. But for all the time that groups like the Klan have existed, we've never had, a restriction as far as their participation in anything. Like, you could be a Klansman and be a senator, a governor, a president, right? You could be in the military. But if you happen to have certain political ideologies, because I think it was the 1950s when that law was, or the act was passed. If you happen to be a member of the Communist Party, you can't hold certain positions. You can't be in the military, right? You can be a neo-Nazi and join. You can declare, you can get recruited and say, hey, last 5 years, I was a member of the Aryan Nation, right? You'll still get in. So I have no problem with them vetting anybody in the National Guard, anybody in the military, because it's way fucking overdue. And I'm speaking as somebody who served with neo-Nazis when he was in the military. The whole aspect of this film, or excuse me, the main aspect of this film is not just about race. It's about power dynamics between men and women, right? So the men, and this is, hopefully I'll do this better than Charlie did on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with the Pepe Silvio thing. But here's the way it works. You have gender power dynamics, which is male over female, right? I'm not agreeing with it. I'm just saying the way that it's preached by these guys. So you have male over female, and then you have white over black, or I should say white over non-white. So at the top of this social hierarchy, caste, whatever it is, it's supposed to be white men. And then underneath them is white women. The reason why white women would participate in this is they understood they're not as good as white men, but they're not black. And the fear is, with equality, as you see in this film, the fear is that with equality, that means that black men are elevated to the same position as white men, which then means that black men leapfrog white women. So when these women are also calling for, we need to have the right to vote, we need to have the right to vote, they know, especially in the South, by law, black men have the right to vote. But by practice, these black men are not allowed to vote. So if these white women can vote, they can now serve as a further barrier to black enfranchisement, economic independence, home ownership. They can basically serve as another wall to black people advancing. And at the bottom of this, unfortunately, is black women, because these white women do not see themselves as the equal of black women at all. They don't see themselves as equal to black men. And white men don't want white women to see themselves as equal to them. So what these white men do, white men, not men who have, what these white men do is preach the racial superiority, right? So they preach, yes, we're superior because we're men, but we're also superior because we're white. So these women can argue, well, yeah, we're women, yeah, Adam and Eve, yeah, that's the way the Bible was set up. Women are supposed to serve men, blah, blah, blah. But we're still in superior position because we're white. As long as we do what we're supposed to do, we're protected from these mongrel hordes or whatever other nonsensical terms that they would use. And I think they even used in the film a couple of times. We'd be protected from them. So our duty is, these men protect us. We uphold the system that they've created to make sure that these other people cannot undo us. And if that means we'll go to orphanages and steal children so they don't get raised by Catholics, if that means that we'll, burn somebody's church because the minister was talking about people voting, we will do any and all of these things to make sure. And it even goes so far as to a little town of Money, Mississippi, and that's how far-reaching this film is, to Money, Mississippi, where Carolyn Bryant claimed that a little black boy got fresh with her. And it was all about reminding people what their place was. Because she was a white woman, and because it was a young black boy, he was 14 at the time, because this young black boy got fresh with her, which he didn't because she made up the whole thing, I am upholding my place by telling my husband is then going to uphold his place as a man and as a white man by then exacting justice or perceived justice against this little black boy by beating, torturing, and murdering him to serve as a sign for anybody else to not do this, even though he didn't. But it was about reminding everybody else what the social order was, and that if you violate that social order, or if I accuse you of violating that social order, you will be murdered. Now, I've been afraid of a bunch of shit in my life, but I can tell you this. I've never known the fear of someone could have me killed because I looked at them too long, because I didn't step off the sidewalk when they were walking towards me, because I didn't call them by their last name, or I objected because they called me by my first name. But that fear is something that exists in these people, and it goes all the way back to, even prior to this film, but it's cemented with this film and letting people know this is the way you have and maintain social, racial, and gender order in this society. If you don't, you're going to lose what you have, or you're going to be a victim to it. So do what you can to stop this from happening. It's your duty. But I'm spent on that one.
I can't imagine why. So do you have anything that people should watch if they liked this? I'm totally kidding. Please
if
do
you
not
like this movie,
watch anything like this. And if you liked this, you should just fuck off.
Well, here's what I'm if you liked it. Well, it's great that you mentioned that, because in Spike Lee's movie Black Klansman, they bring this movie into the film as an example, because when we typically think about racial violence, and this was the rationale for why he brought it up, when we typically think about racial violence, it's always white men in sheets, right? Rarely is there a discussion about the women. I'm glad that's why you asked the question about, what were the women doing and things like that. Women were participating in all this stuff. Because in that scene where they are having their clan initiation and the guys are getting their robes and swearing that they will serve a white Christian nation or whatever bullshit stuff that they do at their circle jerks. You see how the women praise these men for what they're doing and support their men. Now, some of the acting is a little bit over the top because it's supposed to like drive it into you that these women are not innocent bystanders in what's taking place, right? And even the same thing with the civil rights movement. A lot of times we push that, oh, it was the men that were there. There were women there. There were openly gay members of the civil rights, gay leaders in people like Bayard Rustin that were part of the civil rights movement. So we always seem to like narrow it down to the Klan is just and white supremacy is just about white men. The civil rights movement was just about black men trying to get equality. When the truth is you had black men, women, members of the LGBTQ community that were and white people as well that were participating in the civil rights movement. But when it comes to white supremacy, it's just the white men. I mean, we focus on that, but there are white women that are upholding that as well. Movies, I would say to watch I would say to cleanse your palate and that actually offer you a better history. I would say watch Black Klansman. It's a very good film. I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but Spike Lee definitely earned the Oscar for adapted screenplay with that film. Because he went leaps and bounds beyond the book that Ron Stallworth wrote about his experience. But again, on our Twitter, I'll go ahead and send out book links and things to do because I don't think there's really anything that you can watch that would be comparable to this film to where you'd say like, fuck this movie. That's
yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would say if you liked this movie, you're the same kind of person who likes Gone with the Wind for the wrong reasons, and Song of the South again for the wrong reasons. Because you can like this movie for its cinematic achievements at the time, and the same thing with Song of the South as far as mixing live action with animation. Or even the same with Gone with the Wind with the use of color and storytelling and stuff like that. But again, if you like this movie for the wrong reasons, you are a horrible
Will probably
person.
Be arrested later this week.
Yes, the FBI will be knocking on your door.
I can resist. All right. I don't have any movie recommendations for this. I will say I'm glad that I watched it. Just from a film history point of view and the ability to really get a look at just how much film can be used as propaganda. I mean, the mere fact that Silas Lynch isn't a real person, like, hordes of people believed this man was real because this is a historical retelling of what happened, right? Like, you don't even have a real villain. That's how fake your fucking story is. So, again, I feel like they shit on their whole purpose the entire time, and that bothers me. But overall, I'm glad I watched it.
That's a D.W. Griffith movie.
Yeah. Well, I will say, if you want to watch it, I recommend downloading a player that lets you watch it at double or triple time. It helps you get through it. and that's about it. Outside of that, I have nothing left. So if you don't either, we will end there.
I do not. So we can end it there.
Well, then, I hope that the next time that we talk, there's a new president and a new administration.
Well, be careful what you wish for.
that everything went well, because I have a lot of fear going into this week, and I hope it's unfounded. So, until next week, I am James Sabata.
And I'm hoping that there will be a next week. And I'm Doug Guillory.
And we will probably see you here again at thenecronoma.com.